So you log into YouTube and start the taping from that, from within
Yes,
YouTube.
yes. So we're started on the YouTube now, so we can get started. Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
Just
thanks.
out of curiosity.
So I want to welcome everybody to the meeting of the St. Catharines Heritage Advisory Committee for March the 27th, 2025. We begin this gathering by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of the Indigenous peoples. Do we have any additions or deletions to be made to the agenda, aside from what you just noted, Lauren?
Yeah, just moving the 30 Oakdale item to the last item. Yeah, that's
Okay.
it.
So if there's nothing else, can I have a motion to approve the agenda? John, thank you. And all in favor? Okay, done. Do we have any, motion to adopt the minutes of the February 28th meeting? Do we have any questions, comments, criticisms? Any or all of the above? With with Gail no longer here, we have nobody to check on our spelling mistakes and things like that. So if there's nothing about the minutes, then I guess we need a motion to adopt them, approve them. John again, thank you. And all in favor? Okay. Declarations of interest, do we have any? I don't see any, so I guess we move right ahead into the business of the day. Item 7.1, a designated heritage property grant for the B'nai Israel Synagogue, which I believe is for the stained glass. So I guess we'll turn the floor over to Dr. Slepkov, and you can razzle dazzle us.
Oh, I don't know how much I can razzle dazzle since the committee came to view the synagogue. We have obviously been declared a historical site. You would know that because you voted on it, with many thanks to James and his stewardship of that process. And we had a kickoff in at the end of August of the 100th anniversary celebrations. We were able to raise enough money through donations given in advance, unfortunately, in memory of people who have passed away, and from the sale of ads in our souvenir book, which we published in conjunction with the gala in August. And we have painted, repaired all of the cracks, completed all the internal renovations of the sanctuary. Before I explain the pictures, you all might be interested in this. It was meant to be that we be fixing up the sanctuary this year in conjunction with the repairs of cracks above the ark. The artisan that we were using, Artandena, found that there was a gap between the structure of the ark and the wall. It was, in fact, coming away. That's right. There it is there. It was coming away from the wall. So it was being held on by one short bracket, and the four brackets were put in, and the ark was pulled back against the wall. If we had not done what we were going to do, God forbid something could have happened, and that would have fallen forward, and we would have had considerable problems. So the reason why I'm here today is to ask for $5,000 in conjunction with the repair of these stained glass. If you see, there are three wooden panels. On the other side is the Jewish Community Center. And some of the windows that were taken out, we have in storage, and we have more than enough of the stained glass to rebuild those windows. We are in the process of trying to convince an artisan in Toronto, skilled in this, to come down and help us. The problem with fixing the windows is that they were put into the inserts from the outside, and now they're sealed up by a brick wall. So we have to figure out some way to redo the windows and put them in those wooden panels that you see in the bottom right. And the windows obviously will never be able to be opened, but we're hoping to be able to put the illumination behind. So the $5,000 that you have at your disposal to grant to the synagogue for that project, that will go towards that. We have a donor actually who has donated some money to help us with the project. Your $5,000 will mean a great deal to helping us complete that. So we will see all the windows illuminated and the stained glass put in place that was taken out before. I hope that's a sufficient explanation. I wanted to thank, I see him here, Mark. I wanted to acknowledge the fact that it was Mark's observation of the fact that that the stained glass windows extended all the way down from the upper floor and that they were missing on the other wall. It was his noticing of, well, what happened to those windows that led me to realize that we had stained glass. All we need to figure out is how to put them all into a panel and put them back in. But the $5,000 will help us accomplish that. And I believe, Lauren, you wanted to make sure that any questions were answered.
Yes, I know there's some questions from the committee. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Howard.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Do we have questions about the proposal?
Sorry?
About the proposal.
Oh, do you have a question?
I'm just calling for general questions of the
Okay.
committee members.
Sorry.
Yeah. What is the total cost of repairing the windows? If we're putting in 5,000, like, do you have a cost in mind?
To be very honest, we thought that $25,000 would be enough to start to do that project, but now because the artisans are few and far between, and we need somebody who's prepared to rebuild the windows and then help us figure out how to insert them and make the frame as similar as possible. So I cannot guarantee you of a price, but I can say that the $5,000 will go towards the Windows project, that stained glass. We know that the panels for the lighting cost $20,000.
Have you approached any local artisans about repairing the stained
I have
glass?
I have tried, but have not been successful. And unfortunately, this is a very specialized um, project. And unfortunately, our time to do this interfered with the time of the number one artisan in the province having passed away, and there being a struggle between the family of the artisan and the primary employee who had been trained. I'm working with somebody who began his training with this particular company and then went out on his own. He likes the job, he wants to do it. I'm going to ask him if I take a window to him in Toronto, if that might expedite getting further. I
Mhm.
don't, this is the kind of project that I can do just one, two, three.
Is
But
there was one fellow who used to do,
we've already invested in excess of $80,000 in the painting, repairing, redoing the floors of the sanctuary. So, and that's all been done this year.
yeah, because there was one fellow who used to do stained glass, work through Willowbank. So that's why I was asking about local
Well,
contractors.
if you have a name, I'll be glad to follow up if you send it to me. You have
Sure.
my email address, Brian. Thank you
Yep.
very, very much.
Yep.
Would be very
Uh,
helpful if I could find somebody who would be willing to take on the job who's local.
okay. I
And
think I saw Mark's hand first. Or Lauren, do you want
oh,
to
just
break
a
in?
quick thing. You're saying, well, as a part of the grant program, we would be receiving any final invoices to confirm the amounts as well, once the work was done. So that's something that is part of the process.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah, you asked a couple of my questions already. Have you approached anybody locally? Um, I know a couple people that do it as a hobby, more or less, but they're very good. Another question is, um, should we, instead of giving the whole 5,000 straight away where we don't know how much it's going to be, should we contact some people first and give the and hear their quotes? Because it might be much less. Who knows?
Truthfully, when James told me that we would be entitled to $5,000, I really thought the $5,000 was going to go towards the total renovation project. The windows is just a small part of it, but it's the last part, the finishing touch. It's like the pièce de resistance, because re-illuminating those windows will take the synagogue back to the 100 years ago when it opened, because they were symmetrical all the way around, as you quite appropriately saw on your own.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you have the name of a couple of people locally, please, if you send it to me, my email address is howard@slubgov.ca.
Okay.
I
Okay, thanks for
that'd be
your time.
really great. I have somebody in the congregation who's going to look after organizing it for me, but I'll give him the email addresses or phone numbers and he'll contact.
Okay.
Yeah, and through the chair, I'll just jump in just for a second. So it sounds like this project is going to far exceed the $5,000 that we would match. At least based on Howard mentioned that probably up to 25,000, maybe more, depending on who they are able to get to do the work. So I don't know if there'd be too much concern about the committee offering up to $5,000 because it sounds like it's going to be a big project anyways. But as Lauren mentioned, if miraculously it was able to come in under 10 grand, we would only provide up to 50% anyways. So that's happened in the past with some projects where, the final invoice comes in a little bit cheaper and we don't end up maxing out what we originally offered. So we could, as part of the motion, say up to $5,000 if we wanted to. And then once Howard is able to finally get that final invoice to us, staff would take care of that for everybody. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Holly, you had a question?
Hi, Howard. I was going to just suggest, I'll also send you an email. When Rodman Hall was doing their renovation, their ceilings were made up in the front, in the one room there with the stained glass panels, and they had an artisan there that was doing up, there was quite a few panels that were missing, and he was there for months doing some panels of stained glass, and he was a local artist. So maybe we can find out who that was and see if he could help you, Howard.
That would be wonderful. From the beginning, my concern was having the actual pieces of glass to match the rest of the windows in the entire room. And when we found the old windows, they weren't all in great shape, but the glass is there, and it's knowing how to take the glass out and build up the window again the same way. And an artisan would know how to do that. So if you, to howard@slepkov.ca. Thank you very much, Holly.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to send contacts to me, I can also send them Howard's way as well. Yeah.
The fellow that I was thinking about at Willowbank, if he's still teaching there, his name is Willem Treep. He lives he lived in Virgil, so maybe through Willowbank we can find out if he's still doing stained glass. But he used to teach stained glass art as well, so he knows his stuff.
Well, that's what we need.
Yeah.
Local would be better as far as I'm concerned.
If there's no more questions from the committee members, then I guess we need someone to make the motion that we approve the grant for up to $5,000 following confirmation of the completion of the work and some submission of final invoices. So do we have someone who wants to make that motion?
I'd be happy to do that.
Would you, Robert?
I would.
Very good.
It's a great project.
Then all in favor of the motion? And it looks like that's done.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I will say goodbye, and
thank you, Howard.
if any of you want to bring a group to the synagogue, we are now beginning to advertise guided tours, an explanation of what the synagogue represents and its evolution, and I'm the guide. So
thank you, Howard. Thank you for coming.
Howard,
yeah. Oh.
I just want to say, Howard,
for inviting me, Lauren.
Since day one, when you came to us, Howard, to ask about the designation, I'm really glad that this is coming to fruition for you. This is a really great project, and it's great to see that this building is, kind of going to see its former glory. So I think, everybody here is really happy to see that. So thanks so much for the work you're putting into it.
And you'll be glad to know that the library and the museum are proceeding apace as well.
That's great to hear. Thanks,
Very
Howard.
good.
Now I'll be in contact with you, Howard, for next steps.
Thank you very much for all your help, everyone. Bye.
Have a
Thanks.
great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Howard.
Okay, moving on to, I guess it's going to be item 7.2 now, is the downtown HCD study update. I guess, James, you wish to introduce the members of the team and
Yeah, sure. So through the chair, as everybody knows, after a year and almost a year and about 3 months of work, the Downtown Heritage District study is finally complete, or at least a draft of it is complete. It was posted on our Engage page last week. It's 250 pages, so I don't know if everybody had time to digest it all, but that's okay, because we have Lasha Jones and Frank Smith, both from Stantec here today, to kind of give an overview of that study, and basically talk about a little bit of the process and the recommendations that essentially are going to go to council. And we decided yesterday the council date likely is going to be June 9th. It gives a little bit more time to do some consultation work with the downtown kind of business owners and property owners and the BIA in particular. As you all know, we had a public meeting last night, and that was very well attended. I don't know what the final count was, but probably about 40 or 50 people probably were there, maybe. And yeah, the presentation that you'll see today from Lasha and Frank is similar to what was seen last night. And I don't think there's anything else I need to mention, but we also, actually there is, on our Engage page, there is a survey that is up now. Please feel free to fill it out. Let us know what you think about the study, about the findings, because all that information will help to feed into the final draft of the study, and ultimately into what council sees in June. So with that, I'll hand it over to Lasha, and she can take over from there.
Hi, everyone. First question, can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Excellent. We are off to a much better start than last night. This is good. For those of you who were there last night, thank you, and apologies for the repeat on today's presentation, but hopefully there's some benefit in that you can actually hear the presentation and see the slides, unlike last night where we had some technical difficulties. So I know a lot of this will be familiar for those of you who were there last night, and as Heritage Committee members, I know that you're well versed in the process, but I think we'll go through this sort of the presentation we gave last night and the overview, and we'll leave hopefully lots of time at the end to give you a chance to ask questions or have some discussion on the study draft so far and the process. Lauren, can you switch to the next slide, please? Thanks. So what I want to walk through today, just quickly reintroduce our team. I know it's been a while since we've touched base before. Give you a quick overview of the study background and process, go through some of the findings and recommendations, talk briefly about next steps, and then, as I said, give some time for questions and discussion. Next slide. So just to reintroduce our team, as James mentioned, I'm Lasha Jones. I'm the Senior Cultural Heritage Specialist here at Stantec, and my role in this project has been sort of the project manager from the Stantec side. Working with us on this project, we've got Frank Smith, who's here with us today, our historian and cultural heritage specialist. He had a large role in this project in terms of compiling the background history, helping with the inventory and report writing. So he's been really involved in this throughout and can help answer questions if there are any. Megan Rivard, who's not able to attend this meeting today, our senior consultant and team lead, has been really involved in the report as well through sort of quality review and control and helping out as the study goes along. We've had support from DePauli Dang and Stephen Willis, with urban design and planning. Jen Combs provided a lot of support in terms of our consultation coordination. And we've got a lot of other team members as well that have helped out with the inventory of, over 450 properties, doing lots of fieldwork, research, and report writing as well. Next slide. In terms of study background and process, next slide. Thanks, Lauren. I know a lot of you, as members of the Heritage Committee, are going to be very familiar with what a Heritage Conservation District is. As we know, it's part of Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and it really focuses on the collection of buildings and landscapes and that sense of place, greater than the sum of its parts, compared to Part 4, which really focuses on the individual building. We look at heritage conservation districts and we use this phrase time and time again as a way of managing change, right? It's not meant to freeze a place in time or to stop change or stop development or things like that, but we like to use them as ways of managing change as places move forward. And they're also not, kind of retroactive, doesn't force owners to make changes, changing their buildings if back to a certain point in the past, but it works with as people make alterations or additions or development going forward. We got some updated stats from the province this week. As of now, there are 147 heritage conservation districts across the province, containing more than 26,000 properties. And this includes at least 36 districts that are classified as commercial on the website for the ministry, as well as 20 that include a commercial component, as well as maybe residential or other things. So about a third of those have some commercial component in them. Next slide. And as many of you know too, HCDs come in two phases. The study phase, which is where we are right now, which starts with a study area that was been identified by the city through consultation with yourselves, the Heritage Committee, and through Council. And the study is really meant to answer one major question. That's whether an area merits designation, whether it meets the criteria to be considered a heritage conservation district. If the answer to that question is yes, and if Council directs to move forward, an HCD plan is prepared that sets the framework for managing change in that area over time as part of a long-term vision for looking at how to manage alterations, addition, new construction, and a whole host of other things. Next slide. So why was the study initiated? One of the main things, and again, many of you are going to be very familiar with this, was the changes to the Ontario Heritage Act as a result of the More Homes Built Faster Act, which changed how municipalities could deal with listed properties on the register. The study area that we're looking at here in the downtown contains 97 of the city's 163 properties. So this was a really efficient way for the city to look at a number of listed properties and see whether or not a district was a useful tool in protecting those properties, as well as managing change overall for the area, because we know that downtown is an area that's been identified for intensification and is likely to see changes over time. And a district can be a really good and proactive way of looking at and addressing those types of changes. Next slide. The requirements of the Ontario Heritage Act give us a few things that we need to look at in the study phase. The primary one is that question I identified in the beginning, is whether or not the area merits consideration and should be preserved as a heritage conservation district. And that's not so much a yes or no, or a yes or no in terms of whether it's something that's a community's necessarily preferred tool, or what there's a whole host of other things, but the requirements of the Act really ask us to look at the features within this area and see whether or not they meet that threshold. In doing so, we need to examine and make recommendations on the boundaries of the area to be designated. We start with a study area, which in this case was, quite a large area, and we need to make recommendations of whether that whole area is going to be the district or whether there are parts of it that become recommended for being the district. As part of the study process, and this is something that we need to still get some consultation on from you and the community, as if an area merits consideration as a district, and if an HCD plan is going to be pursued, what are the objectives of designation? What types of things do we want to achieve in having an HCD in this area? As we know, there are a whole range of different types of HCD plans, some which are quite prescriptive and have a lot of detail, and others which are much more or flexible or open-ended. So what are the objectives that an HCD is looking for in terms of how it's going to manage change in this area? And finally, we're asked to look at whether there's any changes to the municipality's official plan that need to be made in order to accommodate or support a district. And this includes things like municipal bylaws or zoning bylaws or things like that that may need to be modified to fit with how a district might unfold in the future. Next slide. As many of you know too, the Ontario Heritage Act amendments in recent years have included some new criteria that we are required to use when identifying whether an area merits consideration for a district. In the past, we didn't have criteria, but now we are required to show that an area can be considered as an HCD if it contains at least 25% or more of properties that meet 2 or more of the following criteria. And these are effectively, the criteria outlined in individual designation for Ontario Regulation 906, but they've been kind of modified very slightly to fit the district context. So kind of looking at properties collectively instead of individually. Next slide. Our team also really likes to look at districts and supplement the criteria from the Heritage Act with parts of the Ontario Heritage Toolkit. We find this really useful because the Heritage Act criteria, they're good at identifying cultural heritage value or interest, but sometimes there's a bit of bits of a gap or how we identify properties collectively. The toolkit can really be helpful in terms of identifying the sort of look and feel or intangible elements of a district and how those can be found and how they relate to some of the 906 criteria together. So we tend to look for things in the toolkit that are outlined as a kind of characteristics that many heritage conservation districts tend to have. So is there a concentration of heritage resources? Are there a number of things that together relate to each other and tell parts of a story or shared context, use, design, that kind of thing? We look for frameworks of structured elements. So are these concentrations of resources, whatever they may be, are they linked together in some way, whether that's by natural features or street networks or geography or things like that? We also look for whether there's a sense of visual coherence. When we're thinking about the 906 criteria, there are a number of properties within an area that might meet two criteria, but those two criteria might be very different from each other, or those resources might be very different from each other and not necessarily have as much of a relationship, right? I think we give some examples, or we like to give examples all the time of if you have four buildings and, they all maybe meet criteria for design, but they're, very different designs and come from very different areas, and maybe they meet a historic or a different type of other value or have craftsmanship. But how do they relate to each other? Is there a sense of visual coherence? That's what we like to think of and look for when we're in a district, because it really gets at that sort of sense of place or look and feel that we often associate with heritage conservation different districts. And finally, we look for distinctiveness. We often have in heritage conservation districts a sense of when you walk into an area or you drive through it or you experience it, we often tend to notice that you've entered one type of place that's different than others. And it's not something that necessarily is evident with, a signboard or a feature like that, but you hit a certain point, whether it's an intersection or you moving through different parts of the landscape where you recognize, oh, this area is different than somewhere else I was just before. So we look for areas that are distinct from their surroundings, and we use these features or these elements from the Heritage Toolkit really as supplementary from the Ontario Heritage Act criteria, and they also help us really identify sort of where recommended boundaries should be, which is something that the 906 criteria doesn't necessarily do as well as these other things. Next slide. So in terms of study contents, we look at a huge number of things, as you know, from the length of our report. I know we wish we could probably talk about all of these sections with you today, because there's so much in St. Catharines that we found really interesting and amazing as we went through the study process. Unfortunately, I think we would probably be here all day. But so what we've decided to do for this presentation is we're pulling out a few things just to highlight some of the particulars, and as they relate, some of the things we'll talk about kind of relate to other elements that we're not going to be able to go into as much detail in. So the study as a whole looks at historical development, archaeology, architectural character, streetscape and landscape. We've identified sub-areas. We look at the municipal policy framework. We go into the details of public consultation, evaluation, boundary recommendation and conclusions, and of course, all of the references for the research and work we've done. Today, we're going to touch on a bit more of the items that we've bolded here. So talking a little bit about the architectural character, the sub-areas, public consultation, and the evaluation results. Next slide. So in terms of findings, Laura, if you could go to the next slide, please. We've pulled out the slide here of construction periods because it allows us to speak to a number of things. As we all know, age is not necessarily the only factor in considering something for heritage consideration or heritage value. We've pulled this slide because it was really interesting to us of the 408 properties in the study area. So those are, properties that contain a structure as opposed to maybe a parking lot or vacant land. 64% of them, the building stock, was constructed prior to the First World War, which is quite a high number, even in a study area as big as this. What we found really quite interesting and amazing was that at least the 32 buildings, or about 8%, were constructed before 1852, which is not something we see in other areas of the province. And in part that's because of sort of the history of the Niagara region, but it's also really quite amazing that a number of those buildings have remained and still exist in downtown areas. About 100 buildings, a little over 100, 25%, were built between 1853 and 1875, which is still quite an early building time period. About 31%, 127, were built between 1876 and 1913, which is quite consistent with a lot of the rest of Southern Ontario. And then the remainder were built, after that First World War and in different periods following then. And we find that these periods, they tell us a lot about the evolution of the study area, and they also correspond to different things. So of course, different time periods, different areas of construction are going to have different architectural styles, different building types associated with them, right? The 19th century and early 20th century is when we built a lot of those commercial type buildings that you see on St. Paul Street with, commercial storefront on the first floor and residential or other use on the second floor, which is a building form that we really stopped building, by the mid 20th century, right? Most of our commercial architecture beyond that becomes very different, commercial sort of plazas or malls or shopping centers or larger stores like that. We don't really see that building typology later, into the 20th century. We do see other types of building forms in the 20th century too that are different than, or building types of forms that we would not have seen earlier, more of your office towers or larger sort of government or civic buildings and things like that. So while age is not, the only factor, it speaks to a number of other factors that we see within the study area. And that really talks to the different, themes and periods of evolutions in St. Catharines history and how it evolved and its sort of the different roles of different buildings and areas in the community. Next slide. It also helps us sometimes to identify different, and the mapping here is quite helpful. And when we look at, the age of buildings, we see these sometimes clusters or concentrations of where some of these buildings exist. So a number of them, of course, are located a number of the older buildings are located along St. Paul Street. And you've got clusters in other areas, and you see sort of towards the middle, certainly some of the, the blue colored patches there are a lot more of your 20th century development, things that are, some of the more contemporary buildings that were built, sometimes replacing older buildings, but, kind of showing us those different chapters in St. Catherine's story. Next slide. So as part of the study process, we've done a lot of consultation. We've had presentations and meetings with the Downtown Association, presentations with yourself, the Heritage Committee. We did a walking tour, which I know some of the committee members attended, as well as members of staff, city staff. We have, James has met with the HCD task force, and we have a meeting with the task force again this evening. The Downtown Association had a heritage panel event. I think it was in the fall or late summer. We've had public consultation, PIC 1 back last spring and PIC 2 last night. PSA 1 had a survey attached to it with quite a high number of responses, a total of 141 responses, with 37 indicating that they were business owners or property owners within the study area. We also did a direct survey and questionnaire for property and business owners in the study area to get more feedback directly from that particular group. We've also had direct feedback provided to our team, to staff, and to council via emails, phone calls, and in-person conversations. And we've had consultation with Indigenous groups as well. Next slide. In terms of what we've heard from consultation, the PSC1 survey really highlighted that a number of people find that historical architecture, landscape features, historical associations, or sort of historical themes and history, building types, and particularly the curvature of St. Paul Street as being things that are unique or special to the downtown. A number of people indicated also that they have concerns about the level of protection of heritage buildings within the downtown, and wanted to see, indicated support for wanting to see heritage buildings adapted or reused in new developments. In terms of the property and business owner survey, the feedback was a bit more mixed. About 48% of the respondents suggested that protecting heritage buildings would hurt the downtown. About a third suggested it could help downtown, and the remainder suggested it may have no impact. The city did a great job at breaking down all of the results. So if you want to see the results of each individual question, that's all posted on the city's Engage page, as well as some more breakdowns in our report as well. Next slide. So broadly speaking, we've heard that there is community interest in the downtown's architecture, history, and landscapes. This is a place that is special and important to many people. We also heard through consultation, through the surveys, and through other direct correspondence and through the PICs that there are concerns in the downtown that are sort of outside of the scope of an HCD in terms of the appearance of the downtown, access to housing, substance use vacancies, things like that. So there's things that are certainly on people's minds that are not something that is typically looked at as part of an HCD study or plan, but that's certainly something that we heard a lot from. And we heard a lot of concerns too from property owners and business owners that an HCD could restrict their ability to alter their property, result in increased expenses for maintaining or altering or developing their property, result in difficulty obtaining insurance or financing or increased expenses related to those, and increase red tape as they go through potential alterations or developments. So these are things that we've heard throughout the project at PIC meetings, through the surveys, and in terms of direct correspondence as well. Next slide. Insurance is an issue that comes up a lot when we talk about heritage conservation districts or even individual designation. We know that, there's been challenges in the insurance industry more broadly that have put pressure on rates, and heritage can sometimes be one of those things, one of the boxes that gets added to that as a perceived risk. In a lot of cases, we've seen municipalities be successful managing this sort of potential increase in risk or increase in rates by working with insurance companies and providing a letter that clarifies some of the expectations. A lot of times, insurance companies increase their perception of risk is related to an assumption that if a heritage building burns down, it must be replaced with an exact replica or things like that, which would increase their risk and increase the price of the policy. Most times when municipalities provide the clarification and issue letters stating that this is not the case, it can help resolve that issue. Although, sometimes those, there are a handful of cases where insurance may still be an issue, but generally we've seen success when municipalities have been able to work with insurance companies and provide that kind of clarification. We've heard some concerns too about issues with obtaining financing or that's sort of similar risks associated with financing. Although that's been a less sort of frequent thing that we haven't heard that as much in our experience in dealing with heritage designations or heritage conservation districts, but it's something that was brought up as part of the consultation process here. Next slide, please. So jumping back to our findings again, in terms of understanding what people valued in the downtown and in looking at all of the different aspects of our study through the inventory and our analysis of the landscape and streetscape and viewscapes and all of that, we identified 3 different sub areas within the broader study area. The first is the St. Paul study area, or the St. Paul sub area, which is sort of in that blue outline and blue hatching, which really, and I'll go through these in more detail in the following slides. The Civic Center sub area, which is the area outlined and hatched in purple there, and the South Church Street sub area, which is the area outlined in pink there as well. Next slide, please. So the St. Paul sub-area, as you can imagine, is primarily centered on St. Paul Street, but includes some of the side streets like Queen Street and James Street that branch off of St. Paul Street. And to us, the main defining feature of this sub-area is really that commercial historic street wall with connected buildings, generally kind of between that 2 to 4 stories in height. That type of building with your commercial main floor and residential or other use on the second floors. A number of examples of 1800s to 1900s properties with some contemporary infill, some of which is sympathetic in terms of its style or materials or just the massing that it relates to the sort of typical height and setbacks that are associated with this area. And like many, kind of downtown commercial areas, this is sort of, you see this commercial area with that very, similar setbacks and heights and massing that really have that definable context along St. Paul Street and those adjacent areas. Next slide. The next one we identified was the Civic Center sub area. And so this is that sort of fun, irregularly shaped parcel that includes portions of King Street, Church Street, James Street, and Carlisle Street. All told, it contains about 40 properties and includes a lot of the civic, institutional, and mid-rise office properties. And when you look at the map, it's kind of interesting when you think of the number of properties, because this seems like quite a large area, but I think in a lot of cases, there's a number of properties in this sub area that have quite large, large footprints, large property parcels, and so it has a very different look and feel than the the St. Paul sub area. You have a number of different types of resources, different building types, different types of architecture, a lot more 20th century resources, different building styles and things like that. And a lot of these properties really reflect the importance of St. Catharines as the sort of regional center, the social, manufacturing, and economic center where you started to get those sort of government buildings concentrated in this area, and the commercial and like commercial in terms of sort of the business and office core, as opposed to the kind of commercial storefront that you see on St. Paul Street. Next slide. And finally, we have the South Church Street sub area, and this is an area kind of towards the south of the Laura Secor building towards Ontario Street. It contains about 31 properties, most of which are residential, or at least were residential originally in their use, and have been converted to commercial or sort of a mixed use. And it serves more as a transitional area between that sort of downtown core and the residential neighborhoods that are located to the west. So it sort of demonstrates one of those other chapters in St. Catharines history where you have residential that's quite close to downtown, and a lot of these sort of residential conversions that support that sort of downtown business character, but also have the sort of historic appearance of residential. Next slide. So in terms of the evaluation, and I spoke earlier about the criteria we used, we evaluated the study area as a whole to see if it met the threshold of that 25% required by the Ontario Heritage Act. And so as a whole, we found that the study area itself did meet that threshold. At least 25% of the properties or more meet two criteria. We also evaluated each of the sub areas individually to see how they held up and whether they met that threshold as well, and each of them did. And they also met multiple characteristics from the Ontario Heritage Toolkit that I spoke about earlier. So here, this table here gives you a little bit of a breakdown. If you're looking at the whole study area, a little over half of the properties met two or more criteria from Ontario Regulation 906 in terms of how they evaluated as a district. And in terms of the toolkit, we found in this area a concentration of heritage resources, in certain pockets, framework of structured elements through the street grid and different things that link the different areas, and a distinctiveness. In the study area as a whole, there's maybe a bit less what we would say coherence, just because there's quite a wide variety of resources and different pockets, and things get scattered. So while you might have sub areas that have higher concentrations outside of those sub areas, while there are a number of properties that did meet the two criteria, they might be a bit more scattered or separated by other things that kind of limit that sort of overall coherence or whole. When we look at the sub areas individually, we found that St. Paul area met 74% of the properties met two or more criteria, and we found that it sort of contained all of those characteristics from the toolkit. The Civic Center and South Church Street each met a little over 60% with two or more criteria, and 3 out of the 4 characteristics. Again, each one of those kind of having a little bit less of the sort of coherence, maybe perhaps sometimes, just based on the different types of resources within. Next slide. So that brings us to our recommendations. And this study, we did something kind of different in our recommendations than we typically do in Heritage Conservation District studies. Lauren, next slide. We gave a number of options. And part of that was related to what we heard throughout consultation, and also just in terms of our understanding of the study area and the kind of wide range of resources that are within it, and the size of the study area as a whole. So we'll walk through the options here, and then we've got a few slides that kind of break down a bit of the details and talk about what those mean. So option 1, because the study area meets the threshold as outlined in the Ontario Heritage Act, there is the option to proceed with an HCD plan for the entire study area. Option 2 is to proceed with an HCD plan for all of the 3 sub-areas as a single HCD. So rather than the whole study area, a slightly sort of smaller, shrunken area, but still a relatively large area that focuses on those concentrations of resources that we identified in the sub-areas. Options 3 and 4 looking at the sub-areas as individual districts. So each sub-area would be a separate district with its own individual plan. But the options 3 and 4 differ a little bit in terms of how they're approached. Option 3 would look at individually designating each sub-area as a district or preparing plans for each of those sub-areas in a concurrent time frame, so doing it all at once. But rather than having one plan that addresses all of the areas, each sub-area would have its own specific HCD plan that dealt with just the resources in that area. Option 4 is similar, however, would do that at separate time frames, which means there could be the opportunity to prioritize starting with one sub-area first, followed by another and another after that. It would give the city some opportunity to sort of see how maybe the first one goes, kind of wait and see approach, get a bit of a sense of how that's going before moving on to the next, potentially spreading out resources, things like that. And there's option 5 as well, which is not proceeding with an HCD plan, even though it does meet the criteria, and looking at different alternative approaches that could try and address some of the same goals as an HCD plan. Next slide. So this map here is helpful, I think, in showing what an HCD would look like with the entire study area. Obviously would contain all of the properties within the current study area. And this option prioritizes the largest number of listed properties in the study area because it contains, everything in there. It would be a large HCD and would be a very lengthy HCD plan because there's a lot of different considerations that we would have to give. We typically would include policies specific to each sub-area because they may have different objectives or different treatments. And there probably would be some policies for areas and resources outside of those specific sub-areas. I think if this were to be the approach that council took, it's something that could be completed before the January 1st, 2027 timeline for updating the municipal register. Next slide. Option 2, as you can see, still has quite a large area of the study area recommended as the HCD, but does shrink it a little bit. It prioritizes the conservation of those sub-areas where concentrations of resources are quite strong and still includes 62 of that 97 listed properties, so a good chunk of them. Each sub-area could have custom policies and guidelines, again, that relate to the character and resources of that area. And there would also be policies or direction for, maybe pursuing Part 4 designation for resources outside of this green boundary here, where properties might meet 2 or more criteria and be good candidates for Part 4 designation. Same with the last approach. I think this approach would likely be something that could be completed before that January 2027 timeline. So this slide kind of gives you a sense of what those individual districts would look like if they were all pursued individually, so as sub-areas, as individual districts. Again, if it were to be done concurrently, there's a good chance that a number of the listed resources would be addressed through these, but each sub-area would have its own sort of separate process in terms of how it would be looked at as a district. This also opens up the possibility for separate appeal periods too, because there'd be 3 separate districts. There are 3 separate appeal periods versus the options before that only have one appeal period per district. I think if we're looking at these concurrently, there is still a chance that these could be designated in advance of that January 2027 timeline, but it might require a bit more sort of resources or discussion to make sure that could get done in time, depending on how consultation and stuff like that would be rolled out to address these areas. Next slide. And so again, option 4 looks very similar, but in terms of the main difference here is timelines. If we're doing this as separate districts on separate timelines, it's unlikely that they would all be done before that January 2027 timeline. So some properties, depending on how these were prioritized, could be removed from the register. But that separate timeline approach could potentially allow the city to kind of spread their budget and resources over a longer time frame. Next slide. So option 5 looks at if council decides not to proceed with an HCD plan, what other alternatives are there? And we've identified a number that can address some of the questions or concerns related to listed properties falling off the register and sort of the overall approach to downtown. So one of those approaches would be, preparing cultural heritage evaluation reports and approaching, the 97 properties as individual Part 4 designations. Another opportunity or example could be exploring something called a community planning permit system, CPPS, or a secondary plan for the study area, which is more of a planning-based tool, but can sometimes include heritage policies or address heritage in other ways. There are opportunities to maintain or enhance existing CAP policies for heritage properties or explore tax increment finance programs for Part 4 properties. However, in these cases, there's no process that really manages change to demolition or alteration for properties unless they're designated under Part 4. It does result in a more labor-intensive and cost-intensive approach to protecting listed properties. And if you're entering into, a separate kind of planning process, it's a whole other process and timeline and consultation and everything like that. So that requires, additional engagement and appeals and all of those types of things. So there would be a number of other considerations. While these are options, there's a number of other considerations that go with alongside them. Next slide, please. So I think an important note on HCD plans, and those of you who are familiar with HCDs as members of the Heritage Committee will probably know this, but HCD plans can, there can be a wide range of HCD plans. In general, they're going to require further consultation from the community to identify what the objectives, priorities, and the appropriate policies and guidelines and exemptions are going to be. No HCD is every HCD is unique, and the policies and guidelines need to be reflective of that. What an HCD plan can do is provide explicit guidance, of course, on new development in the downtown, how it can conserve resources, while balancing other municipal policies and goals for intensification. It can be, there can be a wide range in terms of HCD plans being quite prescriptive or quite flexible, depending on what the goals of the community are and what the stakeholders really want to see. And as mentioned before, HCD plans can often be supplemented with enhanced financial incentives, CIP incentives, or commemorative or interpretive measures as well. Next slide. So in terms of next steps, if you can go to the next slide, we have a survey that James mentioned early on that we launched last night after the PAC that's going to be open from today until May 1st. We really need the feedback in terms of helping us understand what options the community wants to see council move forward with, and really what the priorities are for downtown. We really want to see people's responses to the survey to kind of help give council that direction in terms of making their decision. Where we go from here is once we receive all of that feedback and input, we'll be compiling it into our report to release a final version before we go to council. We have additional consultation planned with the task force and the Downtown Association as well. And I think that that brings me to the end of the presentation. And so we're happy to hear questions, comments, anything from you guys. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. That was a really interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, so do we have questions about the study? Lorraine, your hand is up.
Thanks, Brian. Yes, that was very interesting and really complete, almost exhaustive in the level of detail that you provided to us. You really emphasized the fact that there was a lot of variety, that so many different objectives. I'm just wondering if, has anybody gone through those and seen any patterns at all? Is there any kind of consistency in any area that, could serve as an example to other HCD projects?
When you say consistency, like are you asking about in terms of the sub areas or
No, I was actually, in having an HCD go through or having the objectives um, ratified, is there any kind of consistency in the objectives that people
Oh,
choose for
yes.
HCDs?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yes, I think there is often a lot of consistency in what we see in objectives when we get to that HCD plan phase. A number of them typically end up being something like the objective is to conserve heritage buildings, to manage change through the alteration permit system, to not, lose contributing. We usually end up kind of identifying buildings that are contributing or non-contributing. So some of the objectives tend to be, avoiding demolition of contributing buildings, encouraging new development that is of a particular type or scale or of similar materials or things like that. Encouraging adaptive reuse, encouraging use, and encouraging development that, kind of helps maintain the use of heritage buildings. I think we all know that vacant buildings are um, it's never helpful to have a heritage building that's vacant, right? So I think those tend to be a lot of consistent objectives that we see across the board. Sometimes the objectives get, more specific about like, maintaining the architectural character of particular styles or, maintaining or enhancing architectural features or details such as, red brick or buff brick or, Italianate designer or whatever you have that are kind of relevant to that particular district. So yeah, I think there is consistency we see in numerous district objectives, but I think it can depend, and there is some flexibility. There's no prescriptions from the Ontario Heritage Act in terms of what the objectives have to be. So the objectives for one district could just be avoiding demolition or managing change for new development as opposed to, some of those more nitty-gritty things.
Thank you. It sounds like there's a lot of variability there. I see that absolutely. I'm just wondering if it would be helpful for people to know about some of the consistency that you see as a starting point, so that you know, okay, we could start here and then we could move into sort of more detail or more depth depending on what we need. So I just thought if you could provide that, or during the discussion phase of the objectives, if we move forward with that, or if the city moves forward with that, if you could provide that kind of information to them.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point, and that's something that the final draft of our study would probably provide a bit more detail on as well in terms of what direction we would anticipate objectives to go in.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I think Holly, you had your hand up next.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I just had a couple questions. So I know you've done the study now. So Stantec was hired by the city to do this study. So what is your timeline now? After you've completed this survey and the study, is your contract up with the city? Or what is the next steps of Stantec? That's my first question.
So I think the next steps really depend on what council decides to do. If council decides to proceed with an HCD plan, our original proposal and the RFP included, preparation of a study and preparation of a plan if kind of the first phase, if council approved moving on to that second phase. So I think we would likely be involved in preparing a plan if council directs it. I think that it depends on what the option is. If council decides not to move forward with an HCD, then I think it's sort of up to the city to determine what they are going to do instead and how they are going to do that and what resources they're going to need.
Okay, and thank you very much. My second question is too, if this survey and city agrees to going on to the downtown study, I know last evening there was talks about cost for each property to be $5,000 per property. So if you're going to do the 62 or 97 properties, it's 485,000. Who pays for that?
James, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I could take that. So through the chair. So yeah, what Holly's referring to is from my experience, from Lauren's experience, I don't want to speak fully for Lasha and Frank, but their experience probably is similar to ours. Having worked on the private side, doing individual property designations, to get a consultant on board, your ballpark figure is probably around $5,000 a property. It could be a little more, it could be a little less. You might get a discount if you're doing 100, but at the same time, it's, even if it was 4,000, right? You're still looking at $4,000 times 100 properties. So now you're at 400 grand, right? So this project here, council has approved for up to $250,000. And so it's coming in much cheaper than what individual designations would require. So to us, this is the most efficient way of doing this is to, we're actually covering in a way 450 properties and figuring out, should any of those be part of a heritage district, right? So from a kind of cost friendly or taxpayer friendly position, I think this is the best bang for your buck. And I mean, you can see it from the work that's been done already, right? We now have a 450-page inventory of the downtown. There's a 250-page report on it. You can see the value we got out of that, right? So what happens next, we don't know. So if council says, yep, we like the study, we agree that either the whole area or one of the sub areas or multiple sub areas should be pursued as a heritage district. Stantec is still under contract to proceed with the plan, so we would figure out, the process for what that would look like in terms of timelines, because it all depends on how big that study area or that plan area is, right? So, but if council says no, we don't want to proceed with an HCD, we have to then go back to the drawing board internally as staff and figure out, okay, how do we how do we go about protecting these buildings? We don't know if that, based on the resources we have right now, I know, we have the designation subcommittee, which, they're doing good work, but everybody here is volunteers, right? And Lauren already has a lot of work on her plate as well. So getting 100 properties done at once or in a period of time that meets the guideline or meets the deadlines for under Bill 23, it really wouldn't be possible. So we really would be running the risk of losing properties after the Bill 23 deadline kicks in at the end of next year. That's really scary. That's not a great thing for our downtown. We would have to figure out internally, like, how do we go about doing that? Do we bring in more staff? Do we, hire another consultant? Because we would have to do another RFP essentially. We wouldn't be able to just roll over the work that Stantec is doing. If Stantec was interested in it, they would actually have to bid on another contract essentially to do that work. So it would be a process still to get that get to that point, and time is ticking, right? So yeah, it's there's a lot of kind of stuff in the air right now. We're keeping our eye firmly still on, getting to council, and we'll kind of figure out how to pivot after that if we need to. Does that answer your question, Holly? I know it was a little long-winded there, but
Thanks, James. Thank you.
Maria.
Thanks, Brian. Lashia, thank you for digesting the 250-page report for us into bite-sized pieces. I appreciate that. I have a question directly for you and your colleague. Based on the knowledge that you've gained by doing this study, which of the 5 recommendations do you think would best suit us?
That is a good and tricky question.
Okay.
Because I think it depends on a number of factors, right? I think doing the whole district really meets the city's objective of looking at the greatest amount of resources, listed properties or otherwise, right? And that's from a heritage context that can always be really beneficial, right? If you can cover a lot of things in one process, that can be great. It's also a big area. Sometimes it can be challenging or complex, but the city is no stranger to that, right? You have a number of other districts, some of which are also quite substantial. So it's not, a big concern. I think they all meet the criteria, really, right? Like, save for option 5, which is, not really focused on a district. Any of them meet the threshold or the objectives or the requirements of the Ontario Heritage Act. So from a, professional standpoint, they all check the box. I think yeah, I think for us, it's really it's kind of really what makes most sense for the community, given all the other factors, right? There, we've heard through consultation that a number of people value the downtown, particularly St. Paul Street and that commercial corridor. Um, we know there's also a lot of concern, particularly from folks in that corridor, right? The property owners or business owners in there. So I think from a consulting perspective and doing this, I know that Frank and I also really fell hard for that civic sub area. Um, and I know that that's that contains a lot of resources that are, sort of modernist or brutalist buildings that are, some people have a love-hate relationship with,
Yeah.
right? Those can be a hard sell. So from our perspective as, consultants and people who have a bit of a soft spot for those types of resources, we love it, but I know that can be a hard sell to others, in the heritage community and outside of it too. So I think it's really hard to give just one answer to that because there's so many considerations and variables, which is why we did something a little different here and gave all of those options because we really want to see what the community values, and that's one of the things one of the reasons that we kind of identified that second question in the survey, where we've asked people to give us a sense of what they want to see the city prioritize for downtown, and it's not a district specific question, but we hope the answers to that question will really help frame what it is people want to see, what the objectives of any path going forward could be, and how that fits in with the recommendations above.
Thank you. I have a further question to the committee, specifically, I suppose, to James or Lauren. Does that next step of this committee choosing or recommending one of the 5 recommendations, will that depend on the results of the community survey?
So through the chair, the Heritage Committee is its own entity. So if this group here will be able to make a recommendation to council, whichever one you think is best. And hopefully we'll be able to make that recommendation today.
Oh,
And if everybody's comfortable, we do have time though. If you want to digest this, think about it some more, we can bring this up again at a future meeting. We don't have to bring Lasha and Frank back, but we could always talk about it again at the April meeting if we want to have a more fulsome kind of motion made. Right now, I think behind the scenes, Lauren might be like typing up as everybody speaks. But if everybody wanted to think about it and say, here's what we want to tell council, right? Because whatever this committee passes is going to go into my staff report, and that's going to go to council. And maybe there's more that you want to say than just we agree with the recommendation that it should all be a heritage district, right? It might go beyond that, and you might talk about the character of the downtown and how important it is and the history of the city. And you could do something more fulsome if you wanted to take it back and think about it a little bit more. Previously, we didn't have as much time. Originally, we were going to go to council in May, but this week we made the decision to push that back an extra month. So that does give us the time to do that if that's something that this committee desired.
how critical is the response from the community survey to this whole decision-making process?
Well, through the chair, I think it becomes a political decision at that point, right? So the input that we're getting is great in terms of what do people value about the downtown. One of the great things about this is we found out that people really love the architecture and the character of the downtown, like it's citywide. I mean, this group obviously very much appreciates it, but you don't always get to hear from the general public about how they feel about it. And the survey results that we got in round 1, it was like 80+% of the people were like, we are concerned about the historic character of the downtown and losing that. And that's pretty phenomenal. Like that's a great thing to hear, I think, right? And so the feedback that council is getting is that, but they are also going to be getting people who are concerned about insurance and financing and red tape and all that other stuff, right? So that goes into the reports. Like we will comment on all of that. But ultimately it becomes kind of a council, like a political decision in terms of how do you weigh one side versus the other, right? So I can't answer that for council, but that's where a lot of that will play in. But I think also, you know, the surveying and the work that we've done has also been in good faith. Like we've been trying to get as many voices as possible heard, and we could have easily after the first survey said everybody loves this, right? Like and just moved on and not been
Sugarcoat it.
too so. But I don't think that's realistic. We know that there are people that are very concerned, and we heard last night about that. And so it's important that we do our due diligence and find out what those concerns are and make sure that we're honest and upfront about that because yeah, I think if we went to council without those opinions, we wouldn't be taken seriously. So yeah.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question,
It
Maria?
does. Thank you.
Thanks.
Lorraine?
I had gone through the property inventory when Lauren first sent it to us, and I was a bit surprised to see the number of parking lots. So, for example, 6 Court Street, 3 Garden Path, etc. There were quite a few parking lots, and so I wondered if you had received any questions or comments from the public, whether in the survey or at the meeting last night, about their inclusion in the property inventory.
I don't think we received any direct questions related to parking lots. In terms of how we do the inventory, our inventory is based on every single municipal property parcel. So regardless of whether it is a vacant lot or a parking lot or a park or a city-owned building or it's on an already designated building or whatever it is, we look at it because we want the complete data picture. If we have an area and as you said, there are a lot of parking lots or buildings in that. So what that tells us is, there's probably been changes in the downtown, right? Some of those parking lots probably used to be buildings. Some of them have been, open space or parking lots for some time, some of it more recent. It all leads to kind of the understanding of evolution of character, right? Because you might have areas where there are pockets of resources or very old buildings or buildings that meet 2 or more criteria, but they might also be surrounded by a number of factors or separated by parking lots or things like that. So we include parking lots in everything because we want the complete picture.
So I had looked up the definition of a HCD and it said buildings or contributing properties. So is that how you see a parking lot as contributing property?
No, the way we tend to look at contributing properties or non-contributing properties is in this case, any property that met 2 or more of those criteria is going to be considered a contributing property, just because that relates directly to the criteria of the act. Now, within that, there's probably going to be a range of what is contributing because, some things might meet 2 criteria simply for contextual value, but may not have, architectural or historical importance or vice versa. Parking lots are likely not going to meet any criteria, right? So they're
Right.
going to be non-contributing resources. So even though some of them may end up in a potential district, whether if it's the whole area that gets designated or sub areas or what have you, they would get treated differently from a contributing resource, right? There would be, the policies and guidelines there would likely just be that something related to if there's going to be development on them in the future. That's the kind of policies and guidelines that would be applicable.
So that would be included in the HCD as it moved forward. I'm just thinking about, in Hamilton, for example, they're building lots of things on parking lots. So they're building residential housing on parking lots. So would that be something that would be included in the HCD guidelines, stating that that is possible?
Yep. So that would fall under like the policies for new development, right? So new development would be for new development would be applicable whether it's being built on a parking lot or whether it's being, integrating an existing building into a development or tearing down a building and building something new, what have you. It would just policies apply for kind of the development going forward.
Okay, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
And of course, we all know that, parking lots can be great potential sources of archaeological resource material if the buildings that have been demolished have been, the rubble's been pushed in and leveled out and covered over. So they do have value in that respect as well.
So then, Brian, would you have to put in the HCD that, and maybe this would just happen as a matter of course, that any development on a parking lot would first have to have an archaeological study?
But I guess potentially.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because we had a case in Toronto, I think, where they were going to put a new building on a parking lot, and it was right on the site of an 1830s tavern that had been demolished. So when we started to do the archaeology on the site, they found all kinds of, refuse pits and things that had been, covered over, blacktopped over. And they found thousands of artifacts in there. So
Okay. I know because I noticed as well that there were some I want to call them grassy knolls, but they're not exactly that, but grassy areas, no building or anything that were included in the property inventory as well. So they would need some kind of a restriction or suggestion about what could be done if it became part of a heritage conservation district, I would think.
Yeah, so through the chair, perhaps I can jump in for a second about archaeology. So archaeology wouldn't necessarily be covered under the HCD plan. We don't typically so Port Duluth and whatnot, they don't really have archaeological components, but whenever there's development and it's based on the region's archaeological management plan, that plan essentially triggers when archaeology is required, archaeological studies. So there would potentially be, I don't know what parts of the downtown are covered under there, but odds are if there was previously a building there, it's safe to say that there would likely be at least like a stage 1 or 2 archaeological study done initially, right? So whether it'd be more done beyond that, it would depend on the property.
So laying out the parameters then, James, you wouldn't need to include something that's specific?
No, not necessarily. Typically, HCDs don't talk very much about archaeology. Archaeology is kind of a separate, and Lashley, you can jump in if you'd like as well, because you've designed more of these than I have. Right. But typically, archaeology is kind of separate from the HCD plan. Usually, the HCD plan is looking at what's above ground, right? So we wouldn't usually include policies, include what's below. But Lashley, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, and the primary reason for that is because archaeology has its own separate section within the Ontario Heritage Act. It's dealt with under Part 6, and it's got its own other, it's a whole other separate process and framework compared to build heritage or things like that. So an HCD plan typically might provide some high level policies on archaeology, but they would usually kind of mostly point to or reflect existing things like an archaeological master plan or management plan, or kind of point to the typical standards for archaeology or things like that. It's not going to have different or detailed things outside of that because it's a different part of the act.
Right. Okay, thanks. I just was really wondering when I was going through, the parking lots, the grassy areas, things that you wouldn't necessarily have considered a building or a contributing property, but explaining it by the non-contributing properties helps. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Mark, did you have a question?
Yeah, and some comments. I was there at the info meeting last night, and I think there was mostly business owners in there, I think. So not saying that they don't have a say, they have a big say. It is still a small part of St. Catharines, right? And they're very emotional when it comes to this too, right? Very passionate about their business and their incomes. And I talked to a couple people, and what they were concerned about is like they want to see the benefit of other HCDs. Are there impact studies showing the benefits of the HCDs? Like, will it bring more traffic, in turn increase their profits downtown, right? Knowing that the downtown is preserved, like the character is preserved, like will more people like put the effort into keeping it nice? It's like that broken windows theory, right? It's like if you have disorder, even minor disorder, if it's not corrected, it'll increase the disorder, right? Do you have any impact studies of other HCDs that have greatly impacted it in a positive way?
It's a really good question. I think the main piece of kind of information we have on that were studies done by the Heritage Resource Center. They're called Districts Work or Heritage Conservation Districts Work, and they took sort of a representative sample of different districts, and they asked some specific questions. A lot of it related to sort of things like property values, like do property values go up or down if you're in a district or things like that. They took a number of specific questions did community surveys within these existing districts and kind of figured out how they were functioning or operating and released the findings. The challenge with those studies, while they have some really good information, is that they're a number of years old by now, so it's hard to use them as, you know, really current data. And they took a representative sample, right? So they looked at a few districts, but not every single district in the province and stuff like that. And I think the challenge here is that every district is going to be unique, right? And every district and set of circumstances is going to be unique. So I think you might have districts where it's very clear where there have been benefits, and some districts have, you know, I think experienced sort of, you know, that kind of commercial or economic spin-off and kind of relationship to cultural tourism, but not every area or district is going to have that factor, right? You know, a residential district is not necessarily going to have the same type of sort of things like that a commercial district in a certain area might have. So we have some information or data on that, but it's not really a complete set. So it's very difficult to speak to it in terms of like really concrete data or results. I know, you know, James has pulled some studies, and there's a number of studies that are kind of emerging on specific topics and in terms of heritage and things like that out of Calgary. Hamilton did a study as well, but it's not always kind of all encompassing. So, and I wish we had that information and data kind of across the board for districts, but we don't. And so, unfortunately, no.
Okay, well, thanks for that.
Yeah, and I can add to that, Mark, if you don't mind me interrupting for a second. But
Yeah, sure.
so just some other work that I've done kind of behind the scenes, as well as the Ontario BIA Association. We did a kind of seminar with them about about a month ago. Basically, it was, you know, just a discussion around with BIAs who are in HCDs across the province. So, and the goal really was to talk about economic development within those areas, and to find out, you know, has this been a positive experience for people? You know, are they seeing the same issues that where the concerns are being brought up here about financing and insurance and stuff like that? You know, since it's been in place, have you seen positives from, you know, economic development and branding and all that other stuff that goes into making really vibrant downtowns? We got about a dozen or so responses on that. I haven't had, unfortunately, with all the other stuff that's been going on, I haven't had time to be able to like really digest all the information in there. First glance, though, and I think it's for a lot of us who, you know, if you go anywhere in Southern Ontario, you see how vibrant some of these downtowns are, right? And it's really obvious that, you know, these things are working elsewhere. Off the top of my head, I don't know of any where they put in an HCD and things went downhill fast. It's just I've asked people to point them out to me in the past, and I haven't been able to, but it's clear that the Ontario BIA Association at the very least values these, and values heritage, and sees that there's a relationship between it and the success of their downtowns. But unfortunately, that data, it's just not there. For whatever reason, it's just not something that has been explored in depth. It's challenging probably too, and you probably need, you know, it takes somebody like a university or something like that to do that work. And that's what Waterloo was the one that did the studies that Lasha is talking about over a decade ago. So you really need a group like that to kind of take charge and do that type of work. And fortunately, it's too big for us to incorporate into this study, right? Like it's really outside the scope of here, but trying to find the information we can at the very least through things like reaching out to other BIAs is actually like kind of the closest we can get to doing that. But we'll never get the exact data that we would love to have, unfortunately.
Thanks. That's exactly what some people wanted there. Like they just feel in the dark. I don't know how it's going to benefit me. Like they say, like, quote, I want to be brought to the yes. Like bring me to the yes, because I just want more information on the positives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think even people that were against it, like if they have more of that info, like I can tell that they were okay. They thought about it instead of coming with their gun loaded, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for that feedback, Mark. That's good. Did you have more comments and questions, Mark, or was that?
Yes, actually. Mackenzie Campbell from John Brown Homestead was there last night too. And she mentioned the difference between a designated building and just a building being in a heritage conservation district where it's not as strict, right? I think maybe that's something that can be explained to um, the business owners and property owners downtown as well. And you know the main difference between specifically heritage designated building and HCD.
Absolutely. It's this conversation we've certainly tried to have and get the information across as well. But I think um, sometimes people are just reluctant to wanting to have a designation of any type, regardless of the differences between them. But point taken, and certainly something that we can try and put a little bit more detail on in terms of the final study to kind of emphasize the difference between the approaches between individual designation and district designation.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, and I think last night we tried our best, I think, to let people know that the goal for to me, I think personally, and I don't want to speak for the Heritage Committee, but the goal I think for downtown isn't necessarily to, have to approve every little tiny alteration that every single store owner needs to have done. Like I think that's we're not Niagara on the Lake. Like I keep saying that, right? Like we're not that, but we do have the character of the area, as a general character is great, right? And so there has to be kind of a level of flexibility where, people can, work with their storefronts and make them usable for new tenants and everything. But the big moves, like things like demolition, which currently was what we were doing in the downtown. We were just listing properties and just preventing demolition, and that was working just fine. Like that to me is the bigger concern. Like we can't have more parking lots and empty properties in our downtown. It's just that's not good for business either, right? So, um, if we get to the point where we're at a plan phase, I don't think we'll be looking at, something like Yates Street where we're looking at every window and we want to make sure that all the materials match. And I think it's going to be more of a higher level kind of heritage district, more concerned about big picture and how this all fits. And that's the feedback we've got from the public, right? Like they don't the people downtown wouldn't want a Niagara on the Lake style kind of heritage district. So that's fine. If that's what the community, if they don't want that, that's perfectly in their right. And I think it's a good idea for us to listen there. But I do think that big picture stuff like losing entire buildings would be very problematic, and we'd want to make sure that we have the tools in place to be able to prevent that. So and is there some gray area in there as well where it's like, we don't want to see vinyl slapped up on one of our lovely churches or something like that? Like, sure, I think you could make some arguments there. But the nitty-gritty stuff about, storefronts and stuff like that, I think there's a lot of flexibility that we can offer. So that's what we've tried to do, and I think. But I think also some owners just I don't know if there's a lack of trust because they've heard about other heritage districts and they know that, well, in other heritage districts this is how it works, and so they assume that that's what will happen here, or if it's just as alluded to earlier, it's just we don't want any restrictions at all. I don't want to have to deal with that. So there's a wide variation of thoughts on it, but we've tried, I think, to convey that we don't want a nitty gritty type of plan, but yeah, we'll keep trying to hammer that home. So. Thanks, Mark.
Lorraine, you've got a question?
Sorry, last question from me. But something that really I've been thinking about a lot. The more this heritage conservation district sort of becomes a firmer thing in my mind of, this specific area, but I'd like to see some research, and this is just a question in case, Lasha, you've ever seen it, or James or Lauren, about the surrounding areas to a heritage district and how they deteriorate. What causes some places to have the buildings remain, the heritage buildings remain, even if they hadn't been declared a heritage district, but have those quality buildings, those characters buildings remain, and the other areas around them just totally deteriorate in terms of the types of buildings they once had as well. Like what causes that? What's sort of the movement through it? And if you've ever seen any research about it, I'd be really interested in that.
So just to clarify, are you asking about like areas outside, like areas that are adjacent to heritage districts and how they change compared to something that's been designated as a district?
Or
Or like,
something that's being considered a district. So for example, if you look at the top of Geneva Street, and some of those buildings you've included in the area, but some of the other ones you haven't. So
Mhm.
all of that area to sort of the east has totally deteriorated, where once they had those same buildings, and I shouldn't, maybe I'm being too overly dramatic to say totally deteriorated, but they've, that's not being considered and would not be considered a heritage conservation district, because of the social problems that are there and the various other things as well. So I'm just wondering what happens over history to have some places remain, the buildings remain, and then in other places them not.
I'm not sure if I'm aware of any studies that kind of get at that specific question, unfortunately.
Okay, but do you see where I'm going with that? Like the surrounding areas of a heritage conservation district are often the ones who are suffering through the poverty, the buildings. There's this need for social justice programs and there's some of that in the downtown as well. But I'm just saying that, those buildings have been fairly maintained, whereas the other ones haven't. I'm just wondering, what creates this heritage district that stays? Maybe I have to, sounds like I know a tough question, but I've just been thinking about it. No,
No, it's a good question. I don't think I have an answer off the top of my head. I think there's a lot of variables to consider in terms of,
right.
where things are and why buildings get maintained. It's funny, sometimes heritage, sometimes buildings exist or exist because of longstanding stewardship and economic
Mhm.
activity and vibrant downtowns, and that's one reason people keep buildings. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes buildings remain because people are not developing an area and not making changes. So it's really hard to kind of make those distinctions as to why something is or isn't there. So yeah, and
That's
I'm not
actually
aware of any
helpful.
studies.
Yeah, but that's actually helpful.
Okay.
It could be a variety of factors, as we
Yeah,
know. Okay, thanks very much.
you're welcome.
Broadly speaking, the downtown cores that are oldest, they have a lot of the oldest, smaller buildings that are generally a lot of times easier to retain. And as you go further out from like a small historic downtown core, you get to industrial properties and other bigger structures that over time, as industries move in other directions, they fall into disuse. And that's sometimes when you get these like large vacant lots that are, a kilometer away from the downtown core, broadly speaking. Every community is different, but in general, sometimes, you have those larger factories and other types of properties that get demolished while like that historic downtown core remains intact.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I just had one really quick question about the different options that you listed for, doing like the entire area as an HCD, or then, breaking it down into having that staggered approach with like the three different sub core areas. If they were staggered, because I think if I understood your boundaries correctly, there were little adjacent bits that were within the red outline. Are there sufficient similarities or characteristics that maybe some of those could be tacked on to one of those three sub-districts if you're doing a staggered approach to it?
I think that's a possibility depending on how the processes roll out. Like when we do HCD plans, we sometimes boundaries get modified through the process. So, the boundary that gets recommended in a study is not necessarily the final one or set in stone. As we go through HCD plan processes, some things get modified to, include or exclude a little bit here or there. I think the thing we try to generally avoid at the plan stage is making really major boundary modification changes, because that kind of really takes you outside of what was initially recommended and identified and studied and stuff like that. But there's sometimes is some flexibility as you move forward through the plan process to make sort of those minor adjustments. And we've been through HCDs before where we've seen this with other consultants too, where one boundary is recommended, but at the end of the day, council says we want to make a change because of whatever reason, right? So it, the answer is yes, there is that kind of possibility, but we don't always know exactly which way it would go, and it's not always recommended, especially to make like large scale changes kind of late in the game. But it does happen.
Because I thought that way the lifeboat would be a little bit bigger, so to speak. Some of the little outlying areas that are not included in those 3 sub-districts could be maybe rescued at the same time by doing that.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the approach too. Like if it was to be the approach where each one gets designated as an individual district at staggered time frames, it might depend on how long that time frame extends and how things may change in the interim, right? Like if you start with one district now, and by the time you get to starting the third one, it's a decade from now. Hopefully not, but sometimes that's the way things go. There might be some kind of reassessment based on how development has occurred in the interim and how that landscape has changed. So I think that is a possibility if they occur at staggered timeframes. There's potentially some flexibility as time goes on, is to kind of revisit those boundaries and see what makes sense.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Lauren, I see your hand is sort of
Well, not really. Like through the chair. I've kind of been taking some notes, and I have, from what I've heard, is there's some interest, given that we have extra time, in deferring making a recommendation until the April meeting. But I also have a couple here I'll share on my screen. So if there are no more questions or after discussion, we can consider that. I think, given that we have the time to consider, deferring till April makes sense, so we can kind of, absorb the report and kind of consider. But I'm just going to share my screen here. Share through the chair. So right now I have these kind of 3 options that we either defer making the recommendation until April. This is just the kind of generic recommendation that we had, and this one is based more upon what I've heard here today and some of the ideas, and also gives us the option of identifying specific options that the committee agrees with or feels should have some sort of priority or consideration. So I leave it to the committee to kind of discuss those, prior to making a decision. But yeah.
Personally, if I was to have to decide between one of these options, I think I would like to maybe defer until the April meeting, so we all have time to read and digest and not feel like we're doing a knee jerk, we have to make a decision now. So that would be my preference would be to defer until April, but
yeah,
it depends on what the rest of the committee feels. So do we have any other thoughts about that? Robert?
Yes, Brian. In addition to that, is there any way we could, if we defer to getting access to some of the survey results from last night?
Yeah, so through the chair, the surveys that we're opening as of last night, those won't close until May 1st.
Right.
So we won't be able to provide everything from last night, but what I can, it's on our Engage page, but we have the first 2 surveys are on there at the very least. So we can incorporate those. Or I can make sure that you've incorporated those into your analysis. But I mean, this group, the goal, sorry. The goal for this group, for the Heritage Committee, is you're an entity that's very important to the city from an advocacy perspective on heritage issues. And so, not that you shouldn't necessarily take the general public's kind of thoughts on this into consideration, but I think as an advisory committee that's very kind of important to heritage and providing that advice to the city, I think the council would really appreciate hearing your thoughts on this as a heritage policy and a plan going forward, or a study and a policy and a plan going forward. So the rest of the general public, their feedback will be incorporated as well. Like they'll have their venue to be able to do that. The goal for, I think, this committee is to provide its own opinion on the direction that it should go. And you can take into consideration some of the feedback that's been given within the study. But yeah, I don't know if that helps or not, John. But I think the goal really would be for this committee to be able to provide its input on its own, I guess.
Yeah.
Could
Okay.
we have the PowerPoint then, James?
Yeah, we can
Lauren?
share that. Yeah,
Oh
that's
yeah,
not a
for
problem.
sure. Yep. Yep. Yeah, I can distribute
That would be helpful if we defer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we can send an entire package out to everybody and make sure that everybody feels comfortable with everything. And then maybe there would be a fulsome discussion at the next meeting. And then everybody would feel comfortable. You can even think about what you would want in a motion, right? Because I think there's other bits that we'd want to, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but talking about the importance of streets like St. Paul Street, right? And the uniqueness of it. And so, like, I think there are additional kind of things you would maybe want to mention in a motion to let council know, how you feel about the downtown. So I think having that month to be able to do that, I think would be very beneficial.
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
I thought the
Thank you.
inventory was really helpful too. I wouldn't mind taking some more time going through that inventory.
Great.
With all the details that they had on the different properties.
Robert, you had a question, comment?
I did, but then we got carried away. I'm worried about property omissions regarding the three subgroups. And that's why I want to take a little more time to look at this in depth. Even if we were looking at the three subgroups or any portion of those, I noticed one specific piece of James Street from North Side, Raymond to Lake Street did not fall within one of those three categories. And I'd really like to take a closer look on what other things fall without. So I agree that we should be looking at this more carefully until, and give us at least till April 24th meeting. Make a decision.
I think the inventory would have been helpful if it would have listed the subgroup that it falls in as well. Like, that would have been a good addition to the inventory for me. And I don't think it does. Does it?
Top of my head, I'm not sure. Lasha, Frank, do you know off the top of your head?
That's
Frank,
my
do you
point. I
recall?
just don't know.
I know we added that field later in the. Sorry, I'm just trying to start my video again. We added the sub area sort of field later in the process because we identify them kind of as we get further on in the inventory. I know we have that information detailed in the report and mapped, I think. But Frank, do you recall off the top of your head if it's on the inventory form itself?
I am pulling it up right now.
If it's not, it might be something we can look into adding, because that information should be there.
That would be really useful, I think, if it wasn't there. I didn't notice it there, but maybe it's because I didn't know about the subgroup because when I first went through.
It is, I mean, the information is somewhere in the report, but granted, it is a lengthy report and there's a lot to go through. But yeah, we can take a look and see whether it's on there or how it's presented. Because I know in our internal data collection system might just be listed as like 1, 2, 3, and we might need to provide a legend somewhere to help explain that. So.
Thank you.
So it does not look like it's currently included.
I didn't think so.
So Lasha, is that something that would be easy for your group to add and we could circulate? Like I could just repost the PDF to the website, I guess, and then
I will speak with our GIS team. I'm hoping it will be easy, but I am not a GIS wizard. So yeah, I will look into that on our end. And if not, there is a way we can provide that information. We have it all in various data tables somewhere. So whether it's in the inventory form or not, we can certainly provide more detail on that.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we don't have Any more discussion or questions? I guess we should have a motion to, the way I'm seeing it is that maybe we're leaning towards deferral to the April meeting.
Yeah.
So if somebody wishes to make this motion, Maria, you're making the motion?
Yes,
Very
please.
good. Okay. So all in favor? Yeah, it looks like that's done.
Mhm.
So I feel better about that, having, you know, the extra time to consider and digest it. And
Yeah.
Also, a few of our members are missing today.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's a good
true.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, we can, through the chair, we can let Andrew and who else is missing?
Rachel.
And Rachel.
Rachel,
Yes,
yep.
Rachel. We can let them know that this has been deferred, so that way they know they can still, you know, chime in and they can be ready to chat about it at the next meeting.
I guess that's it for the HCD discussion.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, great.
Lasha, Frank, thanks for joining the group. I don't think we'll have you back for the next one, but if any questions pop up amongst the group, if anybody has any questions about the study, I can always pass them along to Lasha and Frank, and I'm sure they'd be happy to respond. If there are a lot of questions, maybe they'll be nice and they'll come back, but I think the next one might just be a general conversation amongst this group. But thanks to both of you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
thank
thank you all so much as a committee for your input and your questions. We really appreciate it. And we'd be happy to, if you have more questions or additional input, please do send it along through James and we'll take a look.
Yeah,
Thanks again.
likewise. We're really happy that you're reading it and looking at it closely. And if there's questions you have, if there's more data, let us know and we can drill into that.
Okay, thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Moving on. I guess we've got the 30 Oakdale to discuss at this point.
Yes, that's the only one that's left. I do apologize. My computer crashed in the middle of that presentation.
Oh
And so
my gosh.
yeah, and I was very worried that the entire meeting would have been kicked out, but because I'm the host, but everything was fine. I just need to re-find the re-find the HIA for 30 Oakdale. So this is our last item. This is consideration for 30 Oakdale Avenue, which is a property that is currently listed. It was listed in 2020 with a group of properties that all had associations with the Welland Canal, and there are some concerns there might be some sort of, significant historical associations or connections to the history. The applicant is currently not here, was unable to attend, and so I will do a little bit of a presentation on the 906 evaluation that was completed for this this property, as long as I can find my notes because they got closed. Hold on a second. There you go. Got them. And let me just reorganize my windows and share with you all. So essentially, for some background, since this property is listed on the Heritage Register but isn't designated, what we're considering today is a removal from the Heritage Register, and removal from the Heritage Register because the 906 evaluation was completed. In this case, it was found to be negative, that the property doesn't have sufficient cultural heritage value or interest to warrant designation, and so the property is being removed from the Heritage Register, and this removal from the Heritage Register will allow for it to be demolished. I'm going to share the screen. which is the HIA. This has been the HIA has been distributed to everyone, which is good. Just do one more thing here. Okay. I do apologize. I'm just organizing windows on my screen so I can see both my notes and make sure that you can see what you guys need to see. And so here's kind of the property from an aerial view. I'm going to scoot down here and get some better pictures. Here's the front elevation. And so just a quick rundown on the 906 evaluation. 30 Oakdale Avenue is described in the Heritage Register as a circa 1875 two-story residence with a one-story side addition. The property is located in the former town of Merritton in an area historically linked to the Welland Canal Loan Company and early canal-related development. Through the evaluation of this property in a heritage impact assessment, the property was found to have no known direct association with the canal's construction or operation, and there's limited historical documentation regarding its early ownership or occupants prior to its purchase by Abraham Bradley in 1907. The property does not demonstrate a significant connection to any theme, event, person, or institution of historical importance to the community, and as such, it was found to have no historical or associative value. Architecturally, the house is a vernacular front gabled dwelling with a side hall plan, a common residential a form. It was believed that the original exterior cladding was rough cast or stucco, and that has been replaced with horizontal aluminum siding. The original windows and doors have been removed and replaced with modern materials. There's little evidence remaining of its original craftsmanship or architectural features or of construction methods that would have distinguished the property from other examples. Additionally, the one-story side addition, which is believed to have been built shortly after the main structure, does not contribute to the unique architectural elements. Due to these, the property it was found to have not have significant design features and does not meet the criteria for any sort of architectural or design value. Contextually, the property is located in an area that has undergone significant change. Many older structures have been replaced by new developments. While 30 Oakdale is part of a group of properties listed on the Heritage Register in 2020, its role in defining, maintaining, or supporting the character of the streetscape is minimal. The building is not considered a landmark, nor is it physically, functionally, or historically linked to its surroundings in a way that contributes to a distinct sense of place. And as a result, the property does not meet the criteria for contextual value. The HIA submitted by CHC Limited, evaluated the property under 906. Staff reviewed this HIA and agree with its conclusions. And so, based on above, staff have we've supported the removal of this property from the Heritage Register. Any questions, concerns? Comments?
I have one. I'm kind of on a little bit of a rant today. I'm sorry, but like I understand this person that owns this home. You pay the money for the evaluation, but then you're not interested in even showing up to be part of this meeting. And there's like some questions sometimes, like why do they want it off the registry? Of course, they want a demolition. What's going to take place? And, it would be nice if this person would even show up or give us some consideration to be here so we can ask questions or defer it to the next meeting. I just don't think it's like fair to us that just because they're paying for the evaluation, then automatically it can get removed off the register and a demolition can occur. So maybe for us as a committee, we could ask, is there a plan that's going on to this property? Is there a new building? Is there a site plan? Who the owner is? You know, there's lots of things that go through my head when something like this just gets thrown at us.
And through the chair, it's definitely a fair point. And I think that if you did choose to defer, so that you could ask the applicant, that's something that you could definitely choose to do. There were drawings submitted for a replacement construction, what they want to put on the site, that were included in the HIA. I can show them to you. But generally, when we look at demolitions, we're considering just the building itself for its value, and it kind of separate from what would be replaced, would be put there. Let's see if here's some drawings. And the only exception to that usually is in the heritage conservation districts, where whatever is going to replace the property is subject to the district guidelines, and it's not being either removed from a register or it isn't losing status, because the property will continue to be a part of the heritage district. Can I find the elevations here? But I think that that's a very fair.
Wasn't there some history of the canal going in back of that Oakdale property?
Yeah, and I think that was the history that people were concerned with and were interested in, and it was found to have no real significant connections to this property specifically. You know, and I think this is it's an important thing to note that this is often how and why the register is used, where there are suspicions that a property may be has connections and may have value, and more research is warranted and is required. So I think in this case, this is actually the register working the way that it's intended to, where there was, sorry, my cat is right here and it's causing havoc, and I'm worried that he's going to unplug my computer. This is probably a good example of the register working as intended, where there were questions about this property. The NHIA was completed. The research is very thorough. That it was found to not be associated in the way that it was that there was concern or interest in, and so it can be removed from the register now. And I think it's but you know, to be able to ask questions of the property owner, I think that's definitely fair. So I think it is a good point. Yeah.
Lorraine?
I would agree, Lauren, that the research is very, very thorough. A lot of it is from Alan Hughes from Brock. Gail used to speak about him quite a bit. So a lot of it is word for word what he had put out about the history of the general area. I just find it a bit of a misnomer in a way, sort of an incorrect to say that it's located in an area that's undergone significant change. Yes, it has behind. On Oakdale, though, there are still many homes, or several homes at least, that are older, and so I don't think using that as a reason why it should be demolished, the fact that it's undergoing change I don't think that's a sufficient reason for it to be demolished. I understand, there's not the connection. However, I do feel quite sad that this home from 1875 is being demolished because it's now going to fit with the new area that's behind it. I don't think that, for my view, that's not a sufficient reason for it to be demolished. So
Yeah.
yeah, I find it really sad when I read this, and I think that the house that's replacing it is actually going to stand out more than this house does as far as what's in the neighborhood.
Yep. Lauren?
Yeah, sorry, through the chair, just two things. One, an important thing that James just reminded me of, is that we actually have, and this is also in the memo, is that we actually have a 60-day deadline to respond to this kind of application. And given when it was submitted and the cycles with council, we do actually have to make a decision today. That we can't defer. That's a fair consideration. And I guess the other comment that I would say that if we were to want to retain this building and not remove it from the register, we would have to be sure that it not only met the 906 criteria, but it met at least 2 906 criteria. Right now in the report, it's not meeting either, and so we would have to make sure that this property did meet at least 2 906 criteria in order to not remove it from the register, but instead pursue a designation on it. And so, yeah, I agree. I love old buildings, and I think it's a really it could be a really cute vernacular home. Unfortunately, with the 906 coming out as it is, that's why it's supported for demolition.
Robert.
Yes, thank you. I'm quite familiar with the area. I spent a lot of time a few years ago looking at properties along here, from Westchester down to parts of Road and Merritt Street, and the properties that I was most concerned about were the ones that backed onto the canal itself, which would be on the, I suppose, on the west side of Oakdale. There's a lot of properties on the other side, or the east side, and all the way down to Merritt Street that are, in fact, have been replaced. A lot of the old buildings, older homes along there have been knocked down and replaced. My concern, I guess, on a lot of these is if we should keep our powder dry and probably pick our battles. I'm not sure that this one is going to meet the criteria to try and hold on to. So, in my estimation, I'd go along with that, regrettably.
Through the chair, I don't want to interrupt if somebody else had a question, but I just wanted to mention that as part of the prioritization project that the designation subcommittee did last year to kind of rank all of the listed properties outside of the downtown for research, we had, I think it was 60 properties we looked at, and this one ranked 54th. So it was pretty low priority and probably would have been looked at by that committee. So I just wanted to throw that out there that it's already been looked at kind of 3 times. Both myself and 2 members of that committee would have looked at this property. And it wasn't really found to be a significant property on our register. So just throwing that out there for consideration for everybody.
And then it makes you wonder if this isn't going to set a precedent for the other little Victorian era houses that are just in this picture, just down the street from it as well. I mean, I'm reluctant to see an 1875 structure get demolished, but between a rock and a hard place.
If I may,
Robert, continue.
If I may, through the chair, I think the precedent has been set here. As I say, I looked at this neighborhood quite extensively a few years back, and especially toward the Merritt Street end of Oakdale, a lot of these buildings have been knocked down. There's very few left, so this is the anomaly at this point, I would think, at that end. I stand to be corrected. It's been a while.
And for everyone that we knock down, it's just one more that we've lost.
Yeah.
Lorraine?
And Robert, I remember when you did, do the survey and filled out the forms and the conversation we had, and I would agree with you too, that the ones backing on the canal are the ones they are really important. Some of these are important too. Like the one beside this is a gorgeous example of a, a heritage home. That one, I think, anyhow, I think it really sets up the idea of that cottage. And that I could see that one associated with the Second Welland Canal, and that's what this has said. So that one we would fight tooth and nail for, obviously. The one across the street from this one is Prince Nesbitt's house. I don't know if anybody knows Prince Nesbitt, but he was a very famous
Artist.
artist and musician in Meriton for years and years and years. So his house is across the street from this one, and I think it's still standing there. And so that does have context. I don't know any of the context for this one besides what I read in the very lengthy assessment done by the group from, where are they from? From Guelph, which was, as I said, well done. So yes, I like the words regrettably, reluctantly. I could see this one being demolished, even though it's an 1875 home, and I would be probably, upset over it, but I could see this one. But some of the other ones that are on that street, for them to say that, there's not that neighborhood anymore is upsetting to me because there is homes that are there. This one is probably the one that could be demolished with the least amount of community outcry. So yes, I don't want to see an 1875. I know I'm sort of talking in circles here, but I don't want to see an 1875 home demolished. But it doesn't look like there's much there. But there are some other ones in the neighborhood that aren't mentioned in this survey when they say, that the neighborhood has changed. That there are some that just absolutely cannot be demolished from that era.
So this one will become our sacrificial lamb.
But that worries me because you're right. What if it sets that precedent? So we have to remain committed to the other ones for sure.
Well, that little dark gray one that's right beside it, I mean, that to me, like it screams like
Yes.
1850s maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one would be one that really, we should
I'd be
fight for that.
I'd be standing in front of it when the bulldozers were coming. So yeah, I agree with you, Brian. That one beside it for sure. And Prince Nesbitt's house and some of the ones that back onto the canal, absolutely. So of them all, I see, as James said, 54 out of 60. Yeah, I get it. I don't like it, but I get it.
I think through the chair, and Lauren, you had your hand up, I think, so I don't want
Oh
to.
no, you go first. Yeah, you go first.
I was just gonna say the issue we run into is whatever. So let's say hypothetically we were going to look at designating this building, right? We would have to find reasons for designation, and they would have to meet the criteria under 906. Those have to be defendable. Like we'd have to be able to, if they were to appeal that designation, it would have to go to the OLT. The OLT would they'd want really strong rationale for why this merits designation. I think as staff, we've looked at it and we thought I don't think we could make a really strong, compelling argument that it would meet two of the criteria. Physical value, I mean, other than it being old, there's not a lot there anymore, unfortunately, and whatever it maybe originally looked like. Historically, it sounds like the historical research that's been done on it is pretty thorough. The person who wrote the HIA, I've worked with them before previously a long time ago, and they're a very solid heritage consultant. And Lauren did a deep dive into the HIA and felt confident with what was in there. And so then you're left with contextual value, and I think what they were getting at probably is, yeah, there has been a fair bit of change on the street, right? Like you can see just in this photo here. So there isn't a lot of like really strong contextual value on this street, perhaps, even though there are remnants of the history of it. Like it's unfortunately it's changed quite a bit. So it's not as strong of a character area as say like Yates Street would be, right? Like where it's a very cohesive feel and everything kind of fits in with each other. So I think from a staff perspective or from like defending this from a heritage perspective, it would be a really challenging property for staff to be able to defend. So that's what we consider when we look at these. And I think too the fact that both myself and two other members of the designation subcommittee evaluated this essentially under 906. That's the criteria that we used as part of that evaluation. And I don't believe, based on how low the score was, I don't believe any of us found that it met 906. I would have to go and double check everybody's individual scores. But out of a score of, I think it's a score out of 60, it scored 6 points, which is like almost the lowest score is 4 points. So it really is a pretty low from the evaluations that have been done, it appears from a 906 perspective, it has pretty low value. So that's kind of the perspective that staff have taken on it. I hope that helps a little bit.
Lauren?
And through the chair, although I definitely hear Lorraine, because I'm not, again, from this community and as familiar with the community myself. And so like when an outsider or, another consultant comes and looks at the streetscape and says, it's changed, it's not what it used to be. And when someone from the community is saying, no, actually there's something still important here and we want to make sure it's protected, I think that's exactly what this kind of process is for, and is to recognize those things. So I don't know if we can, we will record this through the minutes, and this will be noted through the minutes. I don't know if the recommendation itself can acknowledge that there is still a context here that is important to the community, and even though this building doesn't necessarily represent it, I think that that's something worth noting. When an outsider doesn't see it, someone who is familiar with the community does see it. I think that that's important to recognize too. Even if this building in particular is not the representative of that, there's obviously still resources there that do, right? So yeah. So I do appreciate.
I feel sorry for a building like this that probably survived the Meriton tornado of 1898,
Yes.
and then its fate is in our hands.
I know. And that whole streetscape argument really bothers me. I know, James, that was supposed to make me feel better, but it actually made me
No,
feel worse.
I didn't mean to make you feel worse, but it's unfortunately because when you're dealing with, you go to the OLT and you have lawyers and you
Yeah.
have they're grilling you on this stuff, right? And so if you look at this picture here, it's hard to be like, oh,
Yeah.
look, it's a
I know.
really cohesive character, right? Like the picture says 1,000
Yeah.
words, sort of, right? So
But
we get
but
it,
they're
I think, but from a
yeah.
legal perspective, it would
Yeah.
be hard. It'd be hard.
I get that, but if there's individual houses still there, I don't think we should use that really show us that value. I don't want to hear us using a streetscape thing. Like the little box beside it, that little cottage. Yeah, it needs to stay there even if it doesn't match the streetscape. So that's the only thing I would say about the
Yeah,
streetscape thing.
and I think if it met other criteria, like I think
Mhm.
if we were able to say like, yeah, architecturally this is a really strong building, and then you could talk about the context, but because it doesn't really meet any of
Right.
the other criteria, that's where then it becomes challenging if you're
Yeah.
just leaning on contextual.
Right.
We would have a hard time defending that, I think, if we had to. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'll still be sad, but I get it.
So
If
I
it helps,
guess
and this is not meant to be solace in any way, because of the way that the Bill 23 was going to be working, we were obviously looking at prioritizing properties, trying to figure out which ones to prioritize for designation. This one never would have been on our list at all in terms of we would never have got to it. So after 2 years, we wouldn't even have been having this conversation. Somebody would have been able to just demolish it essentially if they had waited. I know that doesn't help, but in a way, we were kind of letting it go anyways,
Right.
as part of that prioritization, and we had to make choices, right? And so yeah, it's unfortunate, but yeah.
Okay, so if there's no further questions or commentary about this, then I guess we need someone to make a motion to remove 30 Oakdale from the register and euthanize it.
I'll remind everybody that you can make the motion. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily in favor of it. It's just somebody does need to make the motion. So yeah.
Robert, you are making the motion.
Biting my finger all the way.
Okay. And all in favor of the motion? Reluctantly.
Reluctantly, okay. Regrettably.
Regrettably.
Okay. Bye 30 Oakdale. I guess we didn't have any miscellaneous items to discuss. Were we doing an update for the designation subcommittee?
I think given we're so over time, and that, you know, we're like, it would be that we're moving forward, that we had an update on some of the properties that we're working on and the pieces, and that we are anticipating, you know, that next month we'll have some 906 evaluations to look at. And I think just kind of leaving it at that, you know, for now, and then
Okay.
for the sake of time. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Don't have any correspondence to worry about, so I guess our next meeting will be April the 24th. Same bat time, same bat station. So do I have a motion to terminate today's festivities? How about Holly?
Right. Can I just ask one quick question so we can maybe put it on next month's agenda?
Sure.
I just was curious about how much money we have in our funds for the Heritage Committee. The reason was as I was watching a Hamilton committee meeting for the Heritage, and they actually mentioned, due to their funds, that they are sending 3 of their volunteer committee members to the Prince Edward County Municipal Heritage Conference, and their transportation and accommodations will be reimbursed by their heritage account. And I was, hey, what the heck?
Yeah, I wanted to go to that.
Don't even get lunch.
Yeah. Well, just,
So through the chair, I can kind of
what
quickly.
happened to our frame history stuff.
So, through the chair, I can really quickly answer that. So essentially, I mean, staff have funds available to be able to go to some of these conferences and whatnot as part of our professional development. Unfortunately, it doesn't extend to the committee members. Hamilton is, I guess they're lucky in that sense. But yeah, there is a Heritage Conference in Prince Edward County this year in Picton. Lauren and I aren't able to go, but that's a great spot to go for a Heritage Conference.
You could
And
send some members of the crew here.
Yes, they have some great workshops.
Yeah, so so Lauren and I are going to be going the National Heritage Conference later this year in October is in Halifax. So Lauren and I will be going to that, and I'm on the CAP board and executive, so I'm going because I get to host an awards ceremony and whatnot. But Lauren is going to be joining as well, and she was even debating on doing some a presentation and whatnot. So yeah, so that's what we'll be doing this year. But I apologize, Holly, there's no trip unfortunately for you to Picton, but if you want to go and report back and let us know how it went, by all means.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting, but
No, that's okay.
We need some hilarity once in a while.
Okay, so motion to terminate.
Holly made it, I think. Didn't Holly make it?
Is it Holly?
I think we already did it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess all in favor?
Yep.
So it's 4:57 according to my clock. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you in April.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
See y'all.
Great.